Greetings from the Tech Cave, Fenris here, and for my first video on the channel, I'd like to discuss import gaming. Now, if you're like me, you spend a lot of time on sites like Buyee, eBay, or even J4U, and the reason why is because you like to import Japanese Famicom or even Super Famicom games, and the reasons for doing so may be different between person to person, but me personally, I do it for two reasons. One, it's because these games are far cheaper than buying, say, NES games, for example. But the second reason is that Japan had such a vast library of games, and most of them didn't even see a release stateside, so it's really nice to be able to get like physical releases of games that we've never got to experience here in the West. Now, with that being said, there are some downsides though. Unlike, again, NES games, there are no screws for most examples of Famicom games. I mean, there is one exception, and we'll get to that later, but for the most part, these don't have any screws. They're actually held together with plastic clips. So most people, when they import Famicom games, they usually just, clean the contacts, and then if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. They just throw it away, or they just throw it back up on eBay. I'm here to show you though that there is a way that we can deep clean these games and check the PCBs to make sure that they are of optimal condition, or at least workable condition, to where you can enjoy them just as good as new. So with that out of the way, let's get started. Now what I have here in front of me is a variety pack of different Famicom games done by different manufacturers and published by different companies. Now, with the exception of these three games here, all of these open up in a very identical manner despite their differences in appearance. Objection! Okay folks, I had to interject a bit. This style of Taito Famicom cartridge actually does not open up the same way as the other Famicom cartridges that I showed earlier. In fact, this one doesn't have any side clips. Rather, there's a center post that holds the two pieces of this cartridge together, so if we were to try to open it up, we would most likely break that post, and we'd end up just damaging the whole thing. Now, in my defense, these Taito cartridges do open up identically to the standard Famicom cartridge. So yeah, with that being said, ignore what I said about this cartridge, and let's move on. Now, there are some minor things to take into consideration with some of them, but we'll get to them when we get to them. Starting things off, we have this little guy right here. Now, this is your standard Nintendo manufactured Famicom cartridge. Now, Nintendo manufactured two different styles of Famicom carts, but we'll get into the other one just a bit later. For now, let's focus on this guy right here. These come in different colors, as most Famicom carts do, but generally speaking, the form factor is identical. So to open these up, rather than grab both sides and pry with the force of Thor, instead, we're going to be using the force of these grips. Now, this is a standard pair of vice grips. You can get them in any hardware store, but all you really need to do to open up these Famicom carts is get your vice grips and kind of line them up with the front of the shell. You don't want to have the vice grips go over the seam here. You just want them to pinch the front. Give it a good couple squeezes. You don't want to squeeze too hard, as you do run the risk of shattering these shells. But once you get it to a point where it's kind of bowing, take a plastic spudger, just kind of wedge it in there. And just kind of go over it. If you're noticing that it's not budging, feel free to give it another squeeze. And there you go. We got one side out. Now we just release, flip it over, and we want to make sure that we only pry at the handle side. You can try the other side, but generally speaking, this gives more force than this other side. So we're just going to flip over the Famicom cart like so. Squeeze again, like so, and just come in with our tool, like so. Just give it a gentle wiggle to release the two top clips here. And if you did everything correctly, it should open up just like that. Next, we have this Jalico release. And as you can see, this one looks radically different compared to the first cartridge we just took a look at. And that's okay. That's kind of the beauty of Famicom games. They each have their own unique style and personality to them that make them visually distinct compared to the uniform gray cartridges of the NES. But even despite that, much like with the first cartridge we took a look at and most other games we're about to take a look at, they open up nearly identically. So again, we're just going to come in with our vice grips, just pinch the front till we get some nice bowing action, and we're just going to slide in with our tool, pop one side, come on, you can do it. I believe in you. Ah, sweet release. Just like that. Oh, and as unfortunately, this might also happen. You might end up with some damaged plastic, but that's okay. We can patch that up later. But as you can see, even like how the board is set in is different compared to our first example. Next we got this Sunsoft cartridge here, and much like the previous two examples, this cartridge looks radically different. But much like the previous two examples, it cracks open the same way too. So, second verse, same as the first. Get the tool. This other tool. Oh, and we got lucky. It looks like both sides decided to pop open. Wiggle. And release. Now we're going to be looking at a few tricky cards. Now this is a copy of Yi Ar Kung Fu. It was manufactured by Konami, and as you can see, unlike most of the other Famicom cartridges, this one has an end label. And the next couple examples I'm about to show you also have end labels. So while it does open up identically to the rest of the games, it unfortunately means that you have to be mindful of this end label here. Otherwise you'd run the risk of damaging it. But all the same, opening it up is basically the same. So let me actually just find a good angle. This will do. Come in with the plastic spudger. That's one side. Release the pressure. Try again. Probably just a little bit more pressure. Whoops. There we go. And like I said, be mindful of the top label, but you just want to open it up ever so slightly. So you can get the PCB out. Like so. Moving on. Next we have this Iron cart. And as you can see, it's very well loved. And actually this is pretty interesting. This copy of Spelunker has an LED indicator, Now, why does this cartridge have an LED indicator? Well, the reason why is because most Famicoms did not have an LED indicator to show that the console was in an on state. So, what this cartridge does is that once you power it on, this LED will come on to show you that yes, your console is indeed on. So that's actually pretty neat. But all the same, let's crack it open. Oh, looks like one side already decided to come loose. And much like the Konami example, there is an end label here, so we just want to be gentle, get it open just enough where we can get the cartridge out. Although it doesn't look like it's gonna, oh, there's actually a very long post in here that's gonna prevent it from sliding out, so it looks like we gotta open it all the way. There we go. Sliding out, and wow, look at that! It doesn't use mask ROMs, it uses EP ROMs. And there's your LED right here. Wow, this is really interesting. But all the same, let's move on. Moving on, we have a Bandai cartridge here. This is a copy of Kamen Rider Club. And as you can see, much like the previous two examples, we got an end label to worry about. And much like every other example, this cartridge looks radically different. But much like the rest, let's pry. Kind of sounds like it's already eager to crack open. Oh, that's one side. That's the other. And once again, be very gentle. Just want to get it open enough to where you can get the PCB out. Gentle. There we go. Easy peasy. Next up, we have this copy of Famicom Jump. Now, the tricky thing about these cartridges is just the sheer size of them. They don't have any end labels, thankfully, but, you know, the size can be kind of intimidating because, you know, you would assume that there's more than just 4 clips. There might be like 6 or 8. Not really. There's only 2 clips on the side, 2 clips on the top, much like every other Famicom cartridge. So, let's just pry it open. So, we're just going to line our tool up. Just going to get it right there. Give it a couple good squeezes. Pry open. That's one. That's 2. Gently. Oop. There we go. Got the PCB out. Let's move on. Now, I had just shown various examples of Famicom games that could be opened up with just a pair of vice grips and a plastic spudger, but that's not always the case. In fact, Nintendo later produced Famicom games in a style very reminiscent of NES cartridges, and these are very easy to open up. You don't even need the vice grips. All you need is just a security bit screwdriver, much like with any other Nintendo, Super Nintendo, or Nintendo 64 cartridge. So we just come in. There's 4 screws. just like that. And this is actually a copy of Final Fantasy 1 and 2 that I had already worked on, and in fact you can even see I have a nice little Voltar board on here, so it plays perfectly in English. Sadly though, not everything can be opened up with the vice grips, and these three cartridges in particular, the best advice I can give is just giving them a passive clean with some isopropyl and some Q-tips, or maybe with one of those one-up cards that people fawned over. Like, for example, this Taito cartridge here, as I highlighted in the correction video, there's no side tabs. Rather, there's a plastic post in the center that if we were to try to open this up, we would most likely break it, and therefore it won't be able to come together the same anymore. In the case of this style of Namco cartridge, the plastic tabs are located on the back shell rather than the front shell, and even worse, the plastic on this is so stiff that unfortunately my tool just can't get a good grip on them so I can open them. I mean, sometimes you might get lucky, but most of the times you won't, and you run the risk of damaging something, whether it's the shell or even the board itself if you're really that unlucky. And in the case of this Namco shell, the sides are curved, so good luck trying to get a good grip with your tools when it's just slipping around all the time. So yeah, unfortunately with these cartridges, the best advice I can give is just clean the cartridges, give the shell a good clean, and, you know, cross your fingers that that does the trick. Returning back to the first cartridge we opened up, we're going to go through the process of refurbishing the board, so that way it will be nice and operational for years to come. So, as you can see here, there's like a very light layer of corrosion along the cartridge edge, which is pretty common. Might be able to get this off with like a one-up card and some isopropyl, but since we got the PCB out, we're going to be doing something a little bit more efficient. Now, one other thing I'm going to do, and this step is completely optional, but I would like to remove and replace this 22 microfarad capacitor with a fresh 22 microfarad capacitor. Now, like I said, this step is completely optional. I like doing it because I don't know the history of this board. I don't know how many times it's been played, and even though this capacitor is most likely good, it's rather old. So it's better to just change it with a fresh cap, so that way it gives me some peace of mind at the very least. So let's begin. Now, let's start by removing the capacitor first. So removing the capacitor is very simple. All we're going to do is just flow some fresh solder onto these two pins. Like so. And removing the capacitor, there's a couple ways of doing it. You can use a desoldering gun, which I do own the gun, but unfortunately my station recently broke down, so that's not an option. You can also use a desoldering pump, which is also a good option, but really, since it's just two little points, you can also just hold the capacitor, flow your iron through here, maybe just add a little bit more solder so it bridges. And slowly but surely, it just comes right out. Now, as for cleaning the solder, if you go through that route, again, you can just use a desoldering pump, but for this exercise, I'm just going to use a little bit of desoldering braid. So, to use the braid, you just want to put a little bit of flux on the braid itself. I use no clean for this application. Tap the point. And it might take a couple passes, but eventually you'll get it. Nope, that didn't quite clear. Probably just add a little bit of flux to that side too. Actually, you know what? Let's add just a little bit of extra solder just to help encourage it to adhere to the wick. There we go. Took a little bit, but we got those holes cleared out. And replacing the capacitor is very simple. We're just gonna grab a fresh cap. I like to order these Nichicon 22 microfarad 10 volt capacitors, which is a much higher rating than these stock caps, which are 22 microfarad 6.3 volts. So these should theoretically last a bit longer. So we're just going to line up the polarity. You can just barely see it, but the positive terminal, actually let me check just to make sure. Huh, interestingly, there's no markings on this board telling you which is positive and which is negative. That's interesting, but we can find out ourselves very easily. So right here, this is a VCC line. So we're just going to take our multimeter and we're going to buzz out the holes. Now you could have also just taken a look at the orientation of the capacitor, but this is just in case you want to double check. So probe one side. Nope. Yep. This is our plus, this is our minus. So the capacitor is going to be bent down like this and slotted in like so. And we're just going to come in here and flow some fresh solder. Kind of blobbing up a bit, but that's okay. Just apply a little bit of no clean. There we go. And of course, we're just going to come in with some side snips. And there we go. Capacitor has been replaced. And just to double check, this side is our positive, as mentioned before. And this pin right here is our negative terminal for the program ROM, so yep. And they're not bridging, so that's the capacitor. Now that we have the capacitor replaced, we're going to move on to cleaning the cartridge edge. Now, for this process, I like to use this guy right here. This is a ink eraser, and in addition, I like to use 91% rubbing alcohol. So the process is pretty simple. You just want to spray along the contacts, take your ink eraser, and go along the direction of the contacts. You don't want to go against, because you can run the risk of stripping the gold. But if you just do it like this, go over it gently, and then of course come in with a towel just to wipe off the residue. You should end up with some nice shiny contacts. And then of course you just want to do it on both sides. There we go. All cleaned. Now, before we go ahead and buckle up our game that we just cleaned and changed the cap on, we need to test it. So in front of me, I have the tininess and a Famicom converter attached to it. So to test this board, we need to determine how we should plug it in. So this Famicom converter works by having your Famicom cartridges plug in label side facing away from you. So what I have here is the front shell of the game we just cleaned up. So to determine how we plug in this board, we need to just put it back on the front shell. And as you can see, the back side equals the PCB and the mask ROMs facing towards you. So we just plug it in like so, flick on the power, and yep, it works perfectly fine. Alright, so let's buckle this up. Okay, so now that we determined that our game is in fully working order, now we just need to buckle it up. So we're just going to take our front shell, make sure it seats in correctly, and then we're going to take our back shell. And the way I do this is I make sure to lock in these back tabs first with the back tabs of the bottom shell. Once it's kind of locked in, we just slowly close it. And then we're just going to come in with our vice grips, clamp, clamp, and there we go. Now earlier we had a bit of a snag with that copy of Ninja Jajamaru where a piece of the plastic kind of broke off here. In fact, here's that piece right here. Now, that's a very common problem to have when opening these cartridges. You don't know the history of them. They could be in some level of degradation, and therefore opening it the normal way could result in broken plastic. And, you know, that's not fun, right? But fortunately, we can fix this. All we need to do so is some 2-part epoxy. So, we're just going to take a sticky note, lay it down here, get our epoxy open, make sure we get just a little bit, we don't need too much, and then we're going to take the tip end of our spudger and mix it up. Once it's all thoroughly mixed up, we're just going to need like a small dab of that. We're just going to apply it along the break. Then we're going to take the broken piece of plastic and we're just going to lock it back into place. Make sure that you get the orientation correct, of course. Okay, so it goes in like so. There we go. Use the flat end to kind of smooth it out. And perfect. So now we're just going to leave that to set. Generally I like to give it about the epoxy starts setting around the 5-minute mark, or at least this brand of epoxy does. But I like to leave it for about 2, maybe 3 hours for the epoxy to fully cure. So we're just going to set this aside and move along. Now, before we wrap up this video, I'd like to talk about one more thing that I think is integral when it comes to restoring these Famicom games, and that's the shells themselves. Now, sometimes you might end up with games like this where it's just really grungy and, not very pleasant. So my solution to that is simply, I'm going to take a piece of magic eraser, and I like to use some all-purpose cleaner and just spray a bit on there, and we're just going to go ahead and scrub this shell up just to make it a little bit more presentable. Alright, and it's not perfect. In fact, I might go over some of these spots with like a bit of a toothbrush. But yeah, other than that, that certainly looks a lot better than it did when it started. And sometimes you may even end up with something like this where they decided to just mark up the case. And I tried to get that stuff off with one other product before I go ahead and use the magic eraser. And that is Rain-X. This stuff works wonders on permanent marker, but you got to be careful as you can run the risk of damaging the label. So what I'm going to do actually is apply on some cotton swabs, and we're just going to go over the affected area, see if we can lift up some of that. Actually, you can already see that it's already doing the trick right there. We're going to see if we can try to get as much of this permanent marker off as we possibly can. Yeah, it's definitely coming off, but it looks like I might have to do just a little bit of extra scrubbing with the magic eraser just to really get some of that stuff off. Alright, much better. And with that, guys, that concludes the video. Now we have here a nice stack of Famicom games that have been cleaned, tested, and verified working, and we even went as far as replacing the capacitor on one of them, so it should last for years to come. Even though the capacitor wasn't really necessary, it gives me some peace of mind. And it just goes to show that just because it looks intimidating or that it looks impossible to clean, it's not impossible to clean. So with that, guys, I thank you all for watching, and I hope to post more videos in the future with repairs and maybe even doing some mod work as well. But I figured that I'd just start small and start simple for my first video on YouTube. So if you liked what you saw, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe, and until the blue moon rises, I'll see you next time.